I actually love those stories because guys that come to it later in life, or guys that you talk to that even went on in their 50s and got like their flight instructor rating or something like that. I mean, eventually, I just think those are some of the best guys because the passion for aviation is there, like we have, and so that's pretty that's a good start to your story, that's for sure.
You're listening to the Wild Blue Podcast, where my co-host and good friend Todd Mitten and I shoot the breeze with other aviation professionals. We cover topics important to aircraft owners, and we just generally have some good fun bantering about the ins and outs of owning and operating an airplane. I'm Chris Kirk, and in this episode, we interview Maurice Woods about his recent and his first aircraft purchase. Maurice has some valuable insights to share with the prospective aircraft buyer, and we think you'll find this episode enlightening. If you'd rather see the conversation on video, head over to our YouTube channel, which is at FlyWildBlue. Okay, well, hey, this is Chris Kirk at Wild Blue Aircraft Sales, and you're listening to the Wild Blue Podcast. I got my trusty sidekick here, Todd Mitten.
It's great to see you again, Chris.
Yeah, well, it's always nice. It's always good, Todd. And today our guest is Maurice Woods, and so Maurice is actually a previous client and a fairly new aircraft owner, and we thought it would be great for him to kind of share his background and his experiences as he got into aircraft ownership, you know, what it's like, what he wasn't surprised with, what he was surprised with, what would he do differently, you know, what's he looking at doing as he moves on. So anyway,
now
Maurice,
you did tell him not to say, well, I wouldn't use Chris anymore. Hopefully you told him that in advance. But anyway, I'm sorry, Maurice. Please tell us a little about yourself.
Well, I'm sort of a recently minted pilot. I became a private pilot in, I guess it was January of 23. Attained my instrument rating in February of 24, and here we are in March of 25. So at this point, I'm somewhere in, I don't know, 260, 270 hours, somewhere around there. So I have come into a little later in life, being in my 50s at this point. Lawyer by trade, and that career took up a lot of my time and efforts. And although I've always had an interest in flying and aviation, things didn't really come together till here later in life when I decided sort of now or never to become a pilot. And I'm glad I did. I've really enjoyed it. It the bug bit me hard, and I spent a lot of time with the airplanes, thinking about airplanes, learning about flying, and in the middle of actually working on my commercial certificate at the moment.
I actually love those stories because guys that come to it later in life, or guys that you talk to that even went on in their 50s and got like their flight instructor rating or something like that. I mean, eventually, I just think those are some of the best guys because the passion for aviation is there, like we have, and so that's pretty that's a good start to your story, that's for sure.
Did you ever fly earlier in life and then like put it on the shelf, or did you just come at this? I'm trying to remember if you'd ever done it, like, you know, when you were in college or anywhere, you know, as a younger adult.
Well, aviation was in my family, although I didn't really realize it as a kid. You know, growing up, Dad flew model airplanes, RC, and so he was always in the hobby room fiddling with RC aircraft. And from a young age, I remember trying to play around with them a little myself, and started building gliders and, you know, sanding the balsa wood and balancing your gliders, throwing them in the backyard, and kind of always had this interest in it. It wasn't until my teenage years that I realized, hey, Dad was a pilot. He had actually quit flying when my little brother and I were born. Mom tells the story that they were going into Cincinnati late one night, and a Bonanza they had, and cockpit filled with smoke, and they got it on the ground, and she made him walk away at that point. Said, "You got two young kids. We're not doing this anymore." And, that was apparently the end of him flying. But I also had a grandfather who was a pilot, and never got to fly with Dad, which is something I kind of regret now at this point that we never had that experience. But was always kind of interested in how things stayed in the air. And when I was in undergrad at University of Oklahoma, they did offer a course down there at Max Westheimer Airport, ground school, and you could go on and do the flying portion too. But I did ground school in 1992, probably 1992, and passed that semester, and I think I passed the ground school test at that time. And then didn't, of course, have the money to pursue the flying part, and went on to law school and just kind of shelved it for, the better part of 25, 28 years.
Now, I was going to ask then, how did you start back into flying? I mean, or how did you start into it as far as like you went out to the airport, or did you know someone, or what led you to the airport to actually physically start lessons?
Well, I've got a good friend who started flying probably 10 plus years ago, and so he piqued my interest in it again. In fact, he and I went to ground school at OU together, fraternity brothers, and always encouraged me, hey, you'd be a great pilot, you ought to get back into it, you ought to do this thing. And then I had a client that was in a flying club out here at Sundance, and said, hey, you ought to come out. We're looking for some people to join the club and fill out some spots. And so I just went out there one evening and looked at this 1969 vintage 172 and met with CFI that we have on board in the club. And he said, sure, I'll teach you to fly. I said, let's go. I'm 50 years old. It's now or never. Let's do this thing. So just sort of dove in head first at that point.
So you learned in a 172.
I did. Yeah, I learned in a 172. That's what I took my check ride in. And the club also has a 182, also late 60s vintage. And shortly after getting my private certificate, I transitioned over and got a little more high performance aircraft, and then did really a lot of cross country in that 182 for the first 100 hours of my flying, probably.
That's good.
And now here I am owning my own aircraft.
Yeah. I want to go back just a step though, because you mentioned something. I don't think I knew that your granddad flew. What did he fly?
He had a V-tail Bonanza, and so I've seen pictures of that. That was, I think they were photographs taken in the 60s, and I've heard stories, of course, about him and how he flew my grandmother and he around the country, and Mom used to tell stories about how he'd fly down to Galveston every weekend and pick up a load of shrimp off the boat and bring them back home, and
That's awesome.
cook them up. So
Now, have you ever tried to look up that N number on the FAA database or anything? I wonder where that airplane is today, if it still exists. Or of course, the N number could have been changed and all that too. But
yeah, these are all thoughts that have been crossing my mind recently, to start digging out old photographs. And,
yes.
Did he?
My father owned a Stearman as well. I'd like to know where that thing is.
Oh man,
Whoa.
no kidding.
Whoa.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Did your granddad fly in the military at all? Since kind of that age where he's maybe World War II guy or Korean guy?
He did not fly, although he was an A&P in the military. During the war, he was on the West Coast. I don't know which base he was at, but he was working on them as a mechanic back in World War II.
Interesting.
Yeah, that's pretty neat. So you got to this point, and so your fraternity buddy that you were talking about, is that someone we know mutually? Is that so he introduced you to encourage you, I should say, to get your license and all that, and then you started thinking about it, and you and I met. When was it? August, September, I think, somewhere in there. Maybe it was last summer. I know it was hot out. You guys,
September.
was September. Yeah, you were up here for some business. And so just a little bit of background. So you mentioned you're an attorney. So what kind of work do you do? And is there a component in there that you can use this airplane for?
I'm a trial attorney. So all of my work is litigation. And, I'm in the courtroom, taking depositions, going to trials, a lot of jury trials. Technology has changed things over the years. I used to have to get on a commercial airplane and fly across the country to meet clients or, try to solicit business. Zoom and Meets and all these different platforms have changed some of that necessity to travel, but I still do it to some extent. Like, for instance, when I came up to see you in Kansas City, Chris, I was working on a case and probably need to go back up there next week and take yet another deposition. So,
Nice.
I flew over to Eastern Oklahoma last week to attend a hearing. So it does have some component where I can use it for work and shorten some time frames. Plus, it's just fun.
Right. And so you're a partner in your own firm.
I am.
Yeah.
I've been doing this. I think this is my 28th year of law practice, and I've been a partner in this firm 23 years.
Wow. And the reason I ask is because sometimes we see customers or clients that will, they, depending on where they work, their employer won't allow them to use their airplane. In fact, I've got a customer right now. I'm selling his PA-46, and he sold his business because he used it for business, but he seemingly retired, but they drug him out of retirement to work for what used to be one of his competitors, but they won't let him fly it. So, that's kind of a bummer. But
and then you said you recently got your instrument rating. Did you do that in the 182 or the 172, or where did you get your instrument rating? Tell us about that.
So I did most of my instrument training in that 172 that I also did my first check ride in. And with my practice and my schedule, with DP availability and some other things going on here, and my CFI availability, who also flies commercial for a large local company, finishing up that last 10 hours and getting to the check ride proved challenging. So without dropping any names, I signed up for a compressed course.
You did? Okay.
Yeah, a 6-day finish up course, and flew to the East Coast, and it was a great experience. Very compressed, kind of 14-hour days between book work, simulator work, and then air work, which culminated in a check ride. And I think that was February 7 of 24 last year. It was a great way to finish it up.
Yeah, I've talked to people, that have done that. And I actually kind of like it. I mean, because I'm confident you had to earn it in that environment, and probably came out of there. I think the instrument rating in general makes us all a better. That is the license or rating that is the most furthering. Like, if you go on to get your commercial, let's say, and as you're talking about, that'll help you, but the instrument rating is the one that I think more than any of them professionalizes your flying. You don't accept flying 300 feet off altitude. You want to be on altitude, that kind of thing. So, but that's a great way to finish it. I'll bet that was a grinding 6 days for you.
It was, but it was also nice to get away from my office, get away from everything that routinely pulls your time from you at home, and just go focus on nothing but finishing up that instrument flying. And I agree with you. I'm glad I did it, and I've put it to use a few times.
Good.
I don't seem to have found as much IMC as I thought that I might. But Saturday I came back from Mountain Home, Arkansas, and there was an overcast layer 1,500 up to about 3,500. And I knew I'd pop through it and get on top in a hurry, but that's a trip where otherwise I'd be fretting the weather and how am I going to find a break? How do I get home? And, with that, I was able to just file away and jump right through it.
Yeah.
That's perfect.
Well, so let's talk about this cool platform you have now that's not a 172 that you're flying. So you went into aircraft ownership, definitely with 2 feet first. You jumped right in, and tell us what you bought.
Bought a 2005 Cirrus SR22 GTS. Great airplane. So glad that I did it.
Yeah. So when you and I met last September, you pretty much knew that that's the platform that you wanted. Why? What was the decision-making process on why you wanted to go for an SR22?
Well, there was a little deliberation before that, and maybe I don't remember how much you were involved in it or not. As I thought about aircraft ownership, and primarily it was caused by not having to share with other guys in the club. Not that I mind the club. I love the guys in the club.
Mhm.
I love the camaraderie and being around them. But when you've got 20 guys in our club flying 2 airplanes, scheduling can sometimes be an issue. And I like the idea of it's there when I want it, and I can go. I've got 2 daughters out of state. Like to travel, and just kind of wanted my own schedule. So, I sort of figured out what's my 80% mission, right? Everybody that's smart was telling me, figure out what's going to fit your needs 80% of the time. The other 20% go commercial or rent something, and so that was kind of the threshold. And at the moment it's sort of my wife and I've got 1 child left at home. So a 4-seater made sense. Did I look at bigger aircraft? I did. Was I interested in the Saratoga that could haul a little more passengers? Yeah, those were attractive to me. But ultimately, when I started looking at aircraft that could go fast for me anyway, I wanted something with some anti-ice, de-ice capability, and I wanted air conditioning. And so I started looking at what's the market out there, and really sort of narrowed it down to the Mooney or the Columbia or the Cirrus. And then as I started studying those 3 platforms a little more, and realizing Cirrus was the one that came out of the factory with those options and things that I wanted from a ground up design more than add-ons, after the fact. And then I started studying the redundancy systems on a Cirrus, the safety history of it, and then not to mention you got a parachute. So ultimately, I kind of landed on Cirrus platform as what I wanted to fly.
Did you have your wife, was she integral in that decision making for the parachute specifically?
I would not say that that's true. I was more focused on that for the safety for them and for my kids, and I really didn't probably understand what it meant to have a parachute on board. It was sort of like, oh, that's a cool feature. And yeah, it saved a lot of lives. It wasn't really until I started doing the transition training with a Cirrus transition CFI that I realized, just how important that thing is and when to use it. And kind of funny how frequently they suggest you use it in a lot of different emergency situations. I mean, it's sort of like, run through a few emergency checklist items. That doesn't solve it. Pull caps, you get in a spin, the recommended procedure, pull caps, and so it really wasn't driven by my wife. I think she she trusts me as much as she can to be the pilot in command. And if that was the aircraft I thought was best for us, then she went along with it.
Is she enjoying flying with you now?
It broke up a little bit. Does she fly with me now?
Yeah, is she enjoying that?
She is. Yeah, she does. She's comfortable with it. She's not a pilot and didn't know anything about being a pilot until I got into it. And so she's learning. She's been a good sport, and sort of just trusted that I knew what I was doing. She's taken a couple of lessons with my CFI.
Yeah.
Just to feel confident in a situation that, if something went wrong, she knew what. Now it's the straight and level button on my DFC 90. Hit the straight and level button and switch over to the right frequency or call somebody. So,
But that's kind of nice to have even someone there to help you when everything's perfectly good, but just have someone, a co-pilot to fly with that's got a little level of interest, maybe.
yeah, it is, and I hope that she continues to grow it a little bit more.
Yes.
I keep trying to get my wife soloed years ago, and I keep trying to get her her license and get it all finished up. I have ulterior motives, though. Todd knows what this is. I like to have somebody else over there that maybe can fly a little while, so I can,
He has a tendency to fall asleep.
I'd like to take a nap.
So, very hard for Chris to fly without someone else who's qualified as a pilot. I hate to say that she does have to overcome her university. I probably shouldn't bring up she has to overcome her University of Oklahoma education in this setting.
Hey, watching you.
She came down with
Yeah,
us. She
yeah.
took that picture I was showing you a little while ago.
That's pretty good. Yeah. No, we have fun. Both of us being Kansas guys, we have to joke around with the Oklahoma guys. But now it's not as much fun. We're not in the same conference anymore. So
Yeah.
so I was going to ask about into aircraft ownership. I think what do you think so far? Obviously you like the flexibility of owning your own aircraft, but that also means making maintenance decisions, tracking when something oil change is due or the annual is coming up, making sure things are scheduled. How's that all working out?
Yeah, that's been an eye-opening experience. I will say to some extent I had an idea, having been involved in the club.
Yes.
And we have a mechanic in the club as well who does most of the maintenance and things to the airplane. But until you own it and realize what goes into tracking all those due dates and tracking the hours that you accrue, figuring out who do I call, what service facility will do this, where do I go to have a mechanic work on this? Is this something I need to go find a Cirrus certified shop, or is this something a local guy can do, or is this something I can do myself? And so that forces me to sometimes jump into the regs, and look, refresh myself on some of those time periods. When I bought this airplane, it was due an annual anyway. So we put it right into annual down in Atlanta. And so it came out fresh. And, I will say even coming out of the annual process, owning the airplane less than about, 2-3 weeks, I still didn't know what I didn't know. There was still a lot to learn about, last week I did my pedostatic checks and transponder checks, and didn't even dawn on me. I should have probably done those last November when I bought it, so I'm not off schedule between November and March. But I realized going through it in the logbooks, hey, it's coming up in March. You better get that done. I have done a few things. Upgraded the navigation lights. Took the old legacy lights out of the SR22, and in December I had those upgraded to an LED system, which saved me a little weight. But I had to figure out, are these acceptable? Have they been approved by the FAA to insert in this aircraft? And they were, but that required a little study and time to go back through. and then make sure, all your paperwork's caught up once they're installed. And I love them. They were a great upgrade. Took about 6 pounds out of the airplane, and I don't have to worry about those old flash tubes.
Pounds.
A gallon of fuel.
Yeah, that's
What,
pretty
so keeping all that in mind, I mean, what advice would you give a new owner along those lines? I mean, any thoughts on how to develop a way to track this stuff? Some people are just better at it than others. I'm not very good at. Chris is better than I am at that kind of stuff. But I don't. Do you have any advice to perhaps a new owner that's or potential owner, I should say, that's listening?
Well, I looked to figure out that there's got to be an app out there for that, right? And I found a couple of commercially available apps for a reasonable cost, a few $1 a month subscription kind of deal. And you can set them up to track when your various checks or life limited components, other things are coming due, and just keep up with your log entries, how many hours you burned, and you get a little ticker that winds down and shows how many hours you've got remaining, or how many days or months you've got remaining till it comes due. So I found that really helpful. You get all these things floating around your head, like, oh my gosh, how am I going to keep track of all these various deadlines on this plane? And then it all kind of came together in an app, and really all now I have to do is open my device or my phone and look and see, okay, that's when this is coming due.
That's great advice, honestly.
Can you share that app and the stuff with your app with your A&P so that they can track that stuff along with you?
I can. Yeah, you can share it. I don't know if you want me to speak the name of the app on a podcast.
No, go ahead.
Yeah, we don't care.
Yeah, it's the CoFlight app is the name of it.
CoFlight.
Is that FLYT?
I was just pulling. It's CoFLYT.
Yeah.
Okay. Yeah, I think I've seen that. That's interesting.
Yeah, that's a great point out, honestly.
So I wanted to ask you a little bit about surprises, both good and bad, since you've owned the airplane. So share a little bit of that. What has kind of been a pleasant surprise as part of the overall ownership experience, and the opposite of that? What's kind of maybe you wish you would have known earlier?
Well, the pleasant part has been having my own aircraft on my own schedule, not having to check it out. If I need to get home and put it up in a hurry one night and go wipe the bugs off the next day, nobody from the club's going to be barking at me about that. So going away for a few days to see my daughter, I don't have to return it because I'm worried about somebody else needing the aircraft on the schedule behind me. I can take an extra day or two if I want. So all of that has worked out, just perfectly like I hoped it would. Chris, you warned me as we sort of consulted through this process. Buying the airplane is only part of the expense. Then the ownership kicks in, and there's things to do after that. So I knew that, and I understood that. I really tried to educate myself about what that meant, particularly with this airplane. And it began with the annual, and it needed some things done to it then. And for instance, I've got a rocket motor and a parachute repack coming up in May.
Right.
Of course, I knew that was on the horizon too. But I also looked for an aircraft that, had a decently recent overhauled engine. So I think this one had maybe 770 hours when I bought it. So I've got a good long time to go there. But then the prop overhaul is coming due probably at next annual in November. So, all these things you kind of look at and know they're on the horizon, and you can kind of get a general idea of the cost. But by golly, it's expensive. and some of these are one-time deals or, once a decade deal. And I knew that going into it, but I would say look at those items to make sure you understand fully what you're getting into on a 1 year time frame, 3 year time frame, depending on how long you're going to own it as a 5 or 10 year item. And I did some things when I purchased the airplane to make sure I held back cash reserves to deal with that.
Mm-hmm.
And instead of just outlaying everything and paying cash for an airplane up front, pay part, finance part, and make sure you've got cash reserves for what may be on the horizon. And so for instance, I had a little nose wheel shimmy in this aircraft, which is apparently common on those Cirrus. It's a matter of how tight you tighten that free castering nose wheel. But it came a little loose and damaged the nose wheel pant because of vibration. So I ended up at a service center in December and had a repair on that I wasn't anticipating. And at the same time, I put in the new nav lights and strobe that I wanted. So, that was a healthy bill that I wasn't really counting on, even though I'd tried to do my homework and forecast what was on the horizon.
Do you feel comfortable sharing any specific numbers? And I've got a follow-on question to that, but do you feel comfortable sharing, like if you were to extrapolate for the full year, so looking forward to your full year, because you and I talked about your first couple of years are going to be typically your most expensive and sometimes that's just getting stuff back up to speed or where you want it, not necessarily upgrades and modifications. But your first year of ownership of 2005 SR22, what are you expecting it maybe on a monthly, if you're averaged out on a monthly basis that you think it's going to cost you? You comfortable sharing that?
Yeah. I'm actually the type of guy that set up a spreadsheet and put it all on the spreadsheet to figure out what's this cost me by the hour. If I fly 100 hours or if I fly at 200 hours this year. And
this is the part where we ask his wife to turn the video off and she watches it. As soon as she turns it off, go on, Maurice. I didn't mean to.
Yeah, I'm not sure I want her to know what the cost per hour is. But figuring some of these, long-term components, like a prop, like a caps, over a reasonable period of recapture, like 3 or 4 years. Yeah, I'm $375, $400 an hour.
That's about what I thought.
That airplane. If I just put it in general terms of the cost of purchasing the airplane, first year of ownership with some of these big items I'm doing, probably close to 15 to 20% of the value I paid for the aircraft itself.
Sure. Okay. That's pretty much right in line with where I thought you were going to come in.
I think certain airplanes have a sort of additional issues that might have to be dealt with. I mean, Cirrus, obviously you have to think about the cap system. That's an extra that's not on many other airplanes, but it certainly is added safety value. There's no arguing that. And then but some airplanes like a PA-46 or something, if you have to replace a windscreen or something that may very, very expensive kind of stuff. There's certain aircraft that have certain items that are just very expensive as compared to maybe just your average Cessna 182 or something like that. But you also have you have a lot more capability. That Cirrus is a tremendous traveling airplane with the added safety, and there's a reason why they've outsold everything over the last 25 years by tenfold or whatever. So, I mean, it's hard to argue with those kind of numbers.
And it's good to hear that. Honestly, that you're spending that kind of money because, it's human nature. We all want to get into something. We all want to get into like the most we can for the cheapest. But so often Todd and I see with buyers, they do that and then they cheap out on maintenance. Frankly, they can't afford it. sometimes they just don't want to afford it. And so then, they'll start bragging about the paltry amount that they spend every year on their airplane. Well, that stuff catches up with you invariably. It'll catch up with you either at the sale or later, which kind of as a sidebar, I had a gentleman call me the other day, semi-bragging about this kind of stuff, right? He had a Gen 1 SR22 and he actually wanted me to buy it. And I started talking to him and I'm like, yeah, I forwarded him on to a competitor. So I don't want to touch your airplane. Hadn't had an annual in 8 years, and he still flies it.
Oh, wow.
He still flies it. Had not had the parachute repacked. It was well overdue. Still flies it, and all I could think of is, oh my golly, I'd like to know where you are because I want to avoid that airport.
Yeah.
But it's good. I mean, it's good that you're spending that kind of money and you get it. So, so anything you do different?
No, really. I think I'd do it all over again. Not to brag or pat you on the back, but I am glad that I had a partner there along the way to talk me through a lot of the acquisition and what to think about. I tried to educate myself as best I could, but it's good to have a sounding board. And I think it's easy that there's a couple different types of people in the world. There's those that get excited and emotional about a new car purchase or new airplane purchase, for instance, and end up walking out of the dealership, with the dealer having knocked their head off, right? I'm more in the other category where I'm sort of not passionate about it. I'm not emotional about it. It's just another asset. Of course, I really wanted to do it, but at the same time, I'd say don't get so involved that you overlook the logic and the intellect behind it. Is this the right airplane? Are these the right financial moves? What is on the horizon in a year to two? Does this really fit my mission, or do I just want to hurry up and get into something that I can fly? I'd say do your best to take the emotion out of it.
That's some sage advice.
Yeah,
right there.
that is spot on.
Yeah, that is very good advice.
And, the same thing applies when it's time to sell. Because after that point, you've had a little experience with the airplane, and that's when people, it's almost like a spousal relationship with their airplane. You've had it for 8 or 10 years, and it's got to sell, and a lot of that
emotion.
Yeah, the emotion it just kicks in, and I've seen it hurt more sellers over time, really.
Right.
So that's good advice, but. No, you got anything else, Todd?
No, this is a fantastic conversation, Maurice. It's been very interesting to hear your perspective as a relatively new pilot who has a passion for aviation, but also has a pragmatic approach and in terms of aircraft ownership. And I think listeners can really take some of your comments to heart and hopefully learn something.
Yeah, I think they will. I think it's great for being able to pass that kind of very recent stuff on. I always learn something like that app. I was not familiar with that app.
No,
so,
that's a good bit of advice too.
Yeah.
So, yeah, very nice.
So any parting words?
Put me on the spot. No, not that I can think of. Thank you guys for having me on. I appreciate the opportunity to speak with you, and good to meet you. And Chris, as always, good to visit with you again, and look forward to keeping up our friendship and talk soon.
Well, if you're up here next week and you have extra time, let us know. We'd love to, take you out to lunch or give you a ride somewhere if you need a ride or something like that.
Get some of that Kansas City barbecue.
Yeah. Yes, sir. All right. Well, Maurice, thanks again. It's good talking with you.
Very nice. Very interesting. Thanks.
Thank you all.
Thanks for listening to the Wild Blue Podcast. Have an idea for a future episode? We'd love to hear from you. Just drop us a line at planes, that's PLANES, at flywildblue.com. Our web address is www, that's in reverence to those of you who still use the www.flywildblue.com. If you have questions about buying or selling an airplane, we'd love to hear from you. And please remember to subscribe to the podcast and share it with others. Thanks so much for listening.